Zerica stood silently in the cold, dimly lit chamber, her shackles cutting into her wrists. The metallic scent of sweat and fear filled the air as she gazed at the towering alien guards surrounding her. They weren't just any guards. They were ruthless enforcers of the alien overlord, the ones who controlled her every move, her every breath. For years, she had lived in chains, treated like nothing more than an object to be used and discarded. But today was different. Today was the day she would die. The executioner, a large, imposing creature with deep red skin and glowing yellow eyes, stepped forward. His heavy boots thudded against the steel floor, echoing in the silence of the chamber. Zerica's heart pounded in her chest, the fear of death taking root deep inside her. She could feel the cold sweat rolling down her spine as she closed her eyes, accepting the inevitable. But then, just as the executioner raised his weapon, a sharp sound pierced the air, a loud, shrill beep. The guards turned, confused. The overhead lights flickered, and suddenly, a strange metallic shimmer enveloped the room. The cloaking device was activated. The executioner's eyes scanned the shadows, but nothing was visible. Not yet. Before anyone could react, the first guard dropped to the ground. A single precise shot to the neck. The others froze, their weapons raised but unsure of where the attack was coming from. The air was thick with tension as they began to panic. And then, through the shimmering distortion, a figure appeared. Tyler. He moved swiftly, his footsteps barely making a sound on the metal floor. He was human, small in comparison to the alien warriors around him, but there was a cold confidence in the way he carried himself. The faint hum of his cloaking device powered down, revealing a sleek, advanced combat suit designed for stealth and speed. His gun was raised, and within seconds, 2 more guards hit the floor, silent and lifeless. The remaining guards were scrambling, trying to locate the invisible threat, but it was too late. Tyler's training kicked in. He was a soldier, and he knew how to fight. He moved in a blur of motion, taking out one guard after another. Each shot was a calculated decision. No waste, no mercy. Zerica watched in disbelief. This was not the rescue she had imagined. She had been prepared to die, to meet her fate at the hands of her captors. But now, there was a glimmer of hope, something she had long since abandoned. This human, this soldier, was here to save her. Tyler reached her quickly, his hand outstretched. "You need to move. Now." Zerica hesitated for a brief moment, her heart racing. Trusting someone, especially someone who wasn't an alien, was not easy. She had been betrayed too many times before. But the look in Tyler's eyes was different. There was something in his gaze that told her this wasn't a trick. This was real. Without a word, she nodded and allowed him to remove her shackles, the cold metal falling to the floor with a loud clang. She winced at the pain in her wrists, but the relief was immediate. The feeling of freedom, something she hadn't known in years, was almost overwhelming. Tyler didn't waste time. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Keep moving. They'll be on us any second." As they sprinted down the narrow corridors, Tyler's mind raced. His mission was to rescue as many of the slaves as possible, but Zerica was his priority. She was the one he had promised to save, and now that she was free, there was no turning back. The facility was collapsing around them, alarms blaring and lights flashing in a chaotic, strobe-like pattern. The alien overlords were furious, and they would stop at nothing to regain control. Zerica stumbled behind him, her legs weak from years of forced labor. She had been treated as nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. But now, for the first time in her life, she was free. Free from the chains, freed from the constant pain, and freed from the cruelty of her captors. The weight of her freedom was heavy, but she could feel the spark of hope growing inside her. They'd rounded a corner, and Tyler shoved open a large, reinforced door. Outside, the night sky was bathed in the glow of distant stars, the landscape a barren, desolate wasteland. But beyond the horizon, the faint silhouette of a ship hovered, its engines humming with the promise of escape. Zerica could barely believe it. She was about to leave this place. She was about to escape the hell that had been her life for so long. But just as she thought she might be safe, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the halls. The alien overlords had sent reinforcements. They were closing in fast. Tyler didn't hesitate. "Get to the ship," he ordered, his voice calm but urgent. Zerica nodded, and together they ran toward the ship. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air as the alien forces launched their counterattack. Tyler, ever the soldier, didn't flinch. He had been in worse situations before. But this was different. This was about saving a life. And for some reason, the thought of Zerica's life was more important than his own. The ship's hatch opened just as they reached it, and Tyler pushed Zerica inside. She collapsed into a seat, gasping for breath. She had never been on a ship like this before. It was sleek, futuristic, and so vastly different from the barren, prison-like world she had known. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the entrance, but Tyler stood at the door, watching for any signs of pursuit. As the hatch closed and the ship's engines roared to life, Zerica felt a strange, unfamiliar sense of safety. She was leaving the only life she had known. She was free. But the journey ahead would be long, and the war was far from over. The ship's engines hummed loudly, the metallic walls vibrating beneath Zerica's fingers as she gripped the armrest of her seat. She tried to steady her breath, but her body trembled with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Her mind raced. Was this really happening? Was she truly free, leaving behind the hell she'd known for so long? She looked out of the small window beside her, watching as the bleak, barren world of her prison shrank into nothingness, swallowed by the vastness of space. But freedom came at a cost. Tyler sat across from her, his eyes focused on the controls. His fingers danced over the console, expertly maneuvering the ship through the chaos of the asteroid field. The holographic display in front of him flashed warnings as the ship jolted with every collision. But he didn't flinch. His hands moved with practiced precision, guiding the ship in and out of danger. He had been in worse situations, but something about this one felt different. His mission wasn't just about completing a job. It was about saving a life. Zerica's life. A loud beeping sound cut through the tension, followed by a crackling voice over the ship's comm system. Enemy vessels incoming. Closing in fast. Tyler cursed under his breath. He had known the rescue wouldn't go smoothly, but he had hoped for more time. The alien overlords wouldn't let a prisoner escape without consequences. Their warships were already on their tail, and they wouldn't stop until they recaptured Zerica, or worse, killed them all. "We have to make it to the jump gate," Tyler said, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Hold on." Zerica gripped the edge of her seat, her heart pounding in her chest as the ship lurched forward. She had never experienced anything like this: speed, danger, and the wild uncertainty of space travel. Back in the mines, all she had ever known was hard labor and endless punishment. But now, she was thrust into this high-speed battle for survival. The sound of enemy fire rocked the ship as the first alien vessel fired its weapons. The ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the blast. But it wasn't enough. A second wave of fire hit the hull, sending sparks flying from the control panel. Tyler's hands moved faster, navigating the ship with a mix of instinct and skill. He had no time to think, no time to hesitate. Every move had to be perfect. Zerica's heart raced as she watched the chaotic scene unfold. She had seen combat before, many times, in fact. But this was different. The alien ships, with their sleek, advanced technology, were far superior to the ragtag human fleet. She could see Tyler's desperation as he pushed the ship to its limits, his face set in a grim expression. Another blast rocked the ship, and Zerica was thrown back into her seat, her body slamming against the harness that held her in place. She gasped for air, but there was no time to recover. Tyler's voice came through the comm system again, strained but determined. "I need you to help me," he said, his eyes glancing briefly at her before returning to the controls. "We've got to break through their defenses and make the jump." Zerica didn't hesitate. She had been trained for this. She had survived years of abuse, years of endless brutality. A part of her had died inside, but the warrior she had become was still very much alive. She pushed herself upright, moving toward the back of the ship where the weapons locker was stored. "Cover me," she said, her voice steady as she retrieved a blaster from the compartment. Tyler glanced back at her, his surprise evident. He had no idea what she was capable of. The ship jolted again, throwing them off course. Tyler cursed, but he didn't stop. He was too focused on the task at hand. But Zerica, her eyes sharp and calculating, had already moved to the rear turret. The ship's automated weapons system had been damaged in the attack, but she was skilled in manual combat. She was ready. "I've got this," she said, her voice calm and confident. She activated the turret and began firing at the approaching alien ships. The blaster's recoil was strong, but Zerica held steady, her focus absolute. She had no choice but to fight. The alien ships had the advantage in firepower, but she had something they didn't: survival instincts honed by years of oppression. The first shot hit one of the enemy ships directly in its engine core. The vessel erupted in a burst of fiery debris, sending smaller fragments scattering into space. Zerica gritted her teeth as she fired again, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. The ship rocked with every explosion, but they couldn't afford to stop. If they didn't make it through this asteroid field and reach the jump gate, they would be trapped. The alien ships would have them. Tyler's voice crackled through the comm system again. "We're almost there, just a little longer." Zerica could see the jump gate in the distance, a swirling vortex of energy that led to another sector of space. It was their only chance at escaping the alien pursuers, but the enemy ships were closing in fast, and they weren't giving up easily. "Keep firing," Tyler shouted. His voice was tense, but there was a hint of admiration in his tone. Zerica wasn't just a slave. She was a warrior, and she was proving it. The battle continued, the ship shaking with every blast, but Zerica held firm. Her aim was true, her determination unwavering. As they neared the jump gate, Tyler initiated the final sequence. The ship lurched again as the engines powered up for the jump. Zerica fired one last shot, hitting an incoming alien fighter dead-on, causing it to disintegrate in a burst of energy. The jump gate loomed closer, its swirling energy pulling them in. But before they could make it, another blast struck the ship's left wing, sending the craft spiraling out of control. The ship shuddered, and alarms blared, warning of critical damage. They were losing power. "Hold on," Tyler shouted, his hands gripping the controls as he fought to stabilize the ship. Zerica's heart raced. She could feel the ship plummeting toward the gate, the pull of gravity getting stronger. If they didn't make the jump now, they would be caught. She had no choice but to trust Tyler. She had to believe that they would survive. Together, with a final push, the ship lurched forward, passing through the jump gate just in time. The universe around them warped into a blur of lights and colors. They were safe. For now. Zerica collapsed into her seat, breathing heavily. Her heart was still racing, but relief washed over her. They had made it. But the danger wasn't over. There was still much to be done, and the war had only just begun. Tyler glanced over at her, his face showing the strain of the battle, but also a glimmer of something else: gratitude. He had seen something in her that no one else had. And she, too, had seen something in him, a glimmer of hope in a universe full of darkness. As the ship drifted into the unknown, Zerica knew one thing for certain: her life had changed forever. And maybe, just maybe, she could find something more than survival. The ship drifted through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming quietly as the turbulent jump settled into a calm, steady course. The stars outside were distant pinpricks of light in the endless black. Zerica stared at them, her mind racing. It felt surreal. She had never seen the stars from this perspective, never felt the eerie silence of space, nor the freedom that came with it. But despite the calm, she couldn't shake the tension that had built up in her chest. The danger wasn't over, not by a long shot. Tyler remained focused at the ship's controls, his eyes scanning the instruments in front of him, constantly alert. His jaw was clenched, and there was a sharpness to his movements that hinted at the strain of what they'd just survived. The battle was behind them, but they both knew they hadn't won. The alien forces wouldn't stop hunting them. They would always be just one step behind. Zerica let out a slow breath, trying to calm her nerves. She turned her gaze toward Tyler. His profile was set and determined, but there was an exhaustion beneath the hard exterior. She had seen it before, that weariness. It was the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting for something bigger than yourself, from taking on a war that you didn't ask for, but had no choice but to face. "We don't need to match their ships in battle," Choi said quietly. "We just need to cut off their supply lines, disable their repair facilities, destroy their fuel depots. 1,000 tiny cuts instead of one massive blow." A low murmur filled the room as the commanders discussed among themselves. Choi could see the reluctance in their faces warring with desperate need. The Drachnid were winning, and pride was becoming a luxury they couldn't afford. Finally, Supreme Commander Axon spoke. "Your proposal has merit, but can your soldiers really accomplish these operations? The risks would be extreme." Choi smiled. "Supreme Commander, humanity has always faced bigger, stronger opponents. We're still here because we learned to turn our weaknesses into strengths. Give us a chance to prove what we can do." The command room fell silent again as Axon considered. Around him, the other commanders waited, their massive forms still except for nervous twitches and shifting limbs. "Very well," Axon declared. "You have authorization for one operation. Show us what your tiny warriors can do, Major Choi. The Coalition's resources are at your disposal." As Choi and Kang left the command center, she allowed herself a small smile. The Coalition had just handed humanity exactly what they needed, a chance to prove their worth. Their size, so long mocked by their allies, would become their greatest weapon. "They still think we're taking a desperate gamble," Kang said quietly as they walked through the oversized corridors. "Let them think that," Choi replied. "Sometimes the best advantage is being underestimated. The Drachnid are about to learn what humans have known for millennia. The deadliest predators aren't always the biggest ones." Sergeant Min Ji-song moved silently through the dim maintenance shaft, her night vision showing the path ahead in shades of green. The access tunnel, designed for repair drones, felt almost spacious to her human frame. Behind her, 5 other soldiers followed in perfect silence, each carrying enough explosives to cripple the massive Drachnid command station. The station's regular corridors towered 3 stories high, built for the giant Drachnid warriors. But these maintenance shafts, these forgotten spaces between the walls, were perfectly sized for human infiltrators. Song's team had studied the layout for weeks, memorizing every turn and junction in the labyrinth of service tunnels. "Junction point ahead," she whispered into her comm unit. "Team 2, status." "In position at the secondary reactor controls," came the quiet response. "No contact with enemy forces. These tunnels are empty except for maintenance drones." Song smiled behind her tactical mask. The Drachnid, like their coalition enemies, fought too big. Their security systems watched for capital ships, for armies, for threats that matched their own massive scale. They never thought to guard against something as small as a human strike team. The maintenance shaft opened into a wider service area. Repair drones sat inactive in their charging stations, their bulky forms nearly as large as the humans. Song's team moved past them like ghosts, their footsteps silent on the metal grating. "Like our ancestors who used their small size to navigate cave systems," she whispered to her team. "We'll show them why being underestimated is a tactical advantage. Set charges at points Alpha through Delta. Remember, we're not here to destroy the station, just to make it stop working. Her soldiers spread out, placing compact but powerful explosive devices at crucial junctions. These weren't the crude bombs of earlier wars. Each charge was precisely calibrated to disable specific systems without causing catastrophic damage. The goal wasn't to kill. It was to demonstrate that nowhere was truly secure against human infiltration. A maintenance drone whirred to life nearby. The team froze, their adaptive camouflage blending with the walls. The drone rolled past, its sensors designed to detect mechanical failures, not living infiltrators. Som waited until it turned the corner before signaling her team to continue. Central reactor control access in 20 meters, her navigator reported. Thermal readings show minimal activity. Looks like they really do leave all the maintenance to automated systems. Song led them to a junction where several shafts met. Above them, they could hear the deep, rumbling voices of Drachnid crew members in the main corridor. The aliens' heavy footsteps made the whole shaft vibrate slightly. Final charges in place, reported Team 2. Beginning withdrawal to extraction point Beta. Song's team reached the reactor control access. Through small gaps in the panels, they could see the massive chamber beyond. Drachnid technicians moved around equipment sized for giants, never thinking to look for enemies in the tiny maintenance spaces. Set the final charges, Som ordered. Remember, precision over power. We want them to know this wasn't an accident. Her demolitions expert worked quickly, placing charges that would overload crucial systems without causing a catastrophic meltdown. The Drachnid would be able to prevent disaster, but only after their station had been completely disabled. All charges set. Timer synchronized with Team 2's explosives. We have 15 minutes to clear the blast radius. Som took one last look through the access panel. The Drachnid continued their work, utterly unaware that their command station was about to be crippled by enemies they had dismissed as too small to be a threat. Begin withdrawal, she ordered. Maintain calm silence until we reach the extraction point. The team moved back through the maintenance tunnels with practiced ease. Every turn, every junction had been memorized. They passed more maintenance drones, more charging stations, more proof that the Drachnid, for all their technological advancement, had the same blind spot as most large species. They never looked down. They reached their extraction point with 5 minutes to spare. The small maintenance airlock, designed for external repair drones, was just large enough for their human-sized shuttle to dock with it. As they boarded their craft, Song allowed herself a small smile. All teams aboard, she reported to command. Clearing blast radius now. Their shuttle detached and moved away from the station, its stealth systems making it virtually invisible against the backdrop of space. At exactly the designated time, precisely placed explosions rippled through the Drachnid command station. Systems failed in careful sequence. Power grids collapsed. Communications went dark. The massive station, pride of the Drachnid fleet, was reduced to a floating hulk without a single casualty. Operation Mosquito complete, Som reported. Mission accomplished. Time to show the galaxy why size isn't everything. As their shuttle rendezvoused with their hidden carrier, Som watched the Drachnid station growing smaller in the distance. The giant aliens would survive, would rebuild, would adapt their defenses, but they would never again make the mistake of ignoring something just because it was small. Sometimes, she thought, the smallest blade made the deepest cut. Captain Taeyong Ryu paced before the holographic display, watching his strike teams prepare for their latest missions. The briefing room, originally designed for giant coalition soldiers, had been modified with human-sized furniture and equipment. It was a small change that represented a massive shift in thinking. 3 weeks had passed since Operation Mosquito's stunning success. The Drachnid command station, once thought impregnable, had been disabled without firing a single shot. Now, coalition commanders who had once laughed at humanity's tiny army were practically begging for human strike teams. The Drachnid never considered that their greatest threat would come from below. Ryu explained to a group of coalition commanders who towered over him. Their entire defense doctrine is based on repelling large-scale attacks. They have no effective countermeasures against human-sized strike teams. The massive alien officers watched intently as Ryu brought up detailed mission footage. The holograms showed human soldiers slipping through maintenance tunnels, bypassing security systems, and striking at critical infrastructure. It was warfare on a scale the Coalition had never considered before. "Look here," Ryu pointed to a particular sequence. "Their defense systems are watching for capital ships, for massive energy signatures. But a human strike team. We're literally smaller than their maintenance drones. To their sensors, we're background noise." A crystalline commander named Vex leaned forward, his faceted body catching the light. "But surely they'll adapt. They must realize their vulnerability by now." Ryu smiled. "They're trying, but they're thinking like giants. They're reinforcing their main corridors, adding more heavy weapons, building bigger walls. But they can't eliminate their maintenance systems, their access tunnels, their repair ducts. Their entire infrastructure depends on these small spaces existing." He brought up new tactical displays showing multiple Drachnid facilities. Every station they build, every base they construct, has to have these access ways. They can't function without them, and as long as these spaces exist, we can use them. The success stories were mounting. In the past week alone, human strike teams had disabled 3 Drachnid supply depots, 4 communication hubs, and 2 shipyards. The mighty Drachnid Empire was being picked apart by enemies they could barely see. "Your species fights with remarkable efficiency," rumbled Admiral Kraz, his massive form casting shadows across the room. "We were wrong to dismiss you based on size." Ryu nodded, remembering the same Admiral's dismissive comments just months ago. "Size isn't everything," he said. "Humans learned that lesson long ago. Sometimes the smallest key opens the largest door." He activated another simulation, showing their next series of targets. The Drachnid's weakness isn't in their weapons or their ships. It's in their thinking. They believe that power comes from size, from strength. They never stop to consider that being small could be an advantage. The briefing room hummed with activity as more mission details were uploaded. Human strike teams across Coalition space were preparing for coordinated attacks. What had started as a desperate gamble had become a revolution in warfare. Each of these targets, Ryu continued, highlighting key positions, is crucial to Drachnid operations. Their ships are fast, their weapons are powerful, but without support infrastructure, without supply lines, without maintenance facilities, they're just expensive pieces of metal floating in space. The Coalition commanders watched as he laid out the strategic plan. It wasn't about matching the Drachnid ship for ship or trying to overpower their defenses. It was about striking where they were weakest, using their own assumptions against them. "We don't need to destroy their fleet," Ryu explained. "We just need to make it impossible for them to operate effectively. Cut off their supplies, disable their repair facilities, disrupt their communications. 1,000 small cuts instead of one big blow." As the briefing concluded, Ryu could see the change in the Coalition commanders' eyes. They were beginning to understand what humanity had known for millennia, that sometimes the deadliest predator was the one you never saw coming. "Your strike teams have full authorization to proceed," Admiral Kraz announced. "The Coalition fleet will provide whatever support you require." Ryu nodded, already focusing on the missions ahead. The tide of war was turning, not through overwhelming force or superior firepower, but through the precise application of small unit tactics that the Drachnid had never considered a threat. As he watched his teams make their final preparations, Ryu felt a surge of pride. Humanity had turned what others saw as a weakness into their greatest strength. The galaxy was learning what Earth had known all along: never underestimate something just because it's small. The war wasn't over, but for the first time since the Drachnid appeared, victory seemed possible. And it would come not from the largest ships or the strongest weapons, but from the tiny warriors that everyone had once laughed at. Admiral Sunlight-Cho sat in her office aboard the Coalition flagship, reviewing holographic battle reports with a sense of deep satisfaction. The display showed 15 Drachnid strongholds, each marked with a green indicator signaling their complete shutdown by human special forces teams. Her tiny army had accomplished in 1 month what the Coalition's massive fleet couldn't do in 6. The door chimed, and a towering Coalition commander entered, having to duck under the doorframe, despite the room's vast size. It was Supreme Commander Axon, his crystalline form catching the light from the holographic displays. "Admiral Cho," he rumbled, his voice carrying the new note of respect that had been absent just months ago. "Your latest operations report is impressive." Cho stood, though even standing she barely reached his waist. "Thank you, Supreme Commander. Would you like to review the details of our recent missions?" Axon settled into the reinforced chair especially designed for his massive frame. "Please, the War Council is particularly interested in your infiltration techniques. Several member species have requested human military advisors." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. These were the same species who had once dismissed humanity as too small to contribute meaningfully to Coalition defense. Now they were practically begging for human expertise. "Size isn't everything," Cho said, bringing up detailed mission footage. "Humans have millennia of experience in asymmetric warfare. Sometimes, the smallest blade makes the deepest cut." The holograms showed human strike teams moving through maintenance shafts, disabling critical systems, and vanishing before the Drachnid even realized they were under attack. Each operation was a masterpiece of precision and timing. "Look here," Cho pointed to a particular sequence. "This team disabled the major Drachnid shipyard by targeting its power distribution network. They never needed to engage the enemy directly. The entire facility went dark without a single shot fired." Axon watched intently. "The Drachnid are adapting their defenses, yet your teams continue to succeed. How?" Cho smiled. "They're still thinking like giants, Supreme Commander. They've added more guards, more weapons, more security systems, but they're all designed to stop large-scale threats. Meanwhile, our soldiers slip through gaps smaller than their security drones." She brought up new tactical data showing future operation plans. The Drachnid built their empire on the assumption that bigger means better. Their ships, their stations, their weapons, everything is designed to overwhelm through sheer size. But they can't eliminate the small spaces in their infrastructure. Those maintenance tunnels, those access shafts, they're essential for their operations, and perfect infiltration routes for human-sized warriors. Axon finished, understanding dawning in his crystalline features. "Exactly. Every defense they build against us just makes their facilities larger, more complex, creating more points of vulnerability for our teams to exploit." The latest reports were still coming in. 3 more Drachnid bases had gone dark in the past hour alone. The mighty empire was being dismantled piece by piece, not by the Coalition's massive warships, but by small teams of human soldiers they couldn't even see. "Your species has proven its worth many times over," Axon admitted. "The Coalition was short-sighted to judge you by size alone." Cho brought up footage from the early days of the war, showing Coalition dreadnoughts failing to catch the swift Drachnid ships. "We all had to learn new ways of thinking. The Drachnid taught us that bigger isn't always better in ship combat. Humans are teaching everyone that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated." A priority message flashed across her display. Another successful operation. A major Drachnid supply hub had just been neutralized by a single squad of human infiltrators. "The war isn't over," Cho said, studying the new data. "But the Drachnid are learning what humanity has known for thousands of years. Never discount an opponent just because they're small." Axon stood, his massive form casting shadows across the room. "The War Council meets in an hour. They'll want to hear your recommendations for expanding the human training program." Cho nodded, already planning the next phase of operations. The Coalition was finally beginning to understand what Earth had known all along, that true power didn't come from size or strength, but from adaptation, innovation, and the courage to use every advantage, no matter how small. As Axon left, Sho turned back to her tactical displays. More mission reports were coming in, each one a testament to human ingenuity and the power of being underestimated. The galaxy was changing, and humanity's tiny army was leading that change, one precisely placed strike at a time. The smallest blade indeed made the deepest cut, and the Drachnid Empire was bleeding from 1,000 such wounds, never seeing the hand that wielded the knife until it was too late. The massive Coalition Assembly Hall gleamed under the light of 1,000 stars visible through its transparent dome. General Hyunwoo Lee stood at the podium, his small frame drawing every eye in the vast chamber. Though he barely reached the height of most species' waists, there was no trace of the mockery that had once filled these halls when humans spoke. The Drachnid Empire had fallen 3 days ago. Their last stronghold had gone dark not with a thunderous battle, but with the quiet precision of human strike teams slipping through maintenance shafts. Their mighty fleet, cut off from supplies and support, had surrendered without firing a shot. The Drachnid Empire fell not to the largest army, but to the most adaptable one, Lee declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. In demonstrating the power of human-scale warfare, we haven't just won a war. We've revolutionized how the Coalition will approach conflict for generations to come. The assembled representatives of 100 worlds listened in respectful silence. Many of them had once laughed at humanity's tiny army. Now they competed for human military advisors, eager to learn the tactics that had brought down an empire. Lee gestured to the holographic displays showing key moments from the war. Look at these victories, not won through overwhelming force or superior firepower, but through precision, adaptability, and the courage to think differently. The images showed human strike teams moving through spaces the Drachnid had never thought to guard, turning the enemy's assumptions about size and power against them. Each operation was a masterpiece of tactical innovation. The phrase, human-sized, is no longer an insult in military circles. Lee continued, a slight smile playing at his lips. It has become a mark of elite status, representing precision, stealth, and decisive action. Admiral Kraz, who had once dismissed humans as too small to matter, nodded in agreement. His massive form dwarfed those around him, but his respect for humanity's achievements was clear. We came to the Coalition as the smallest member species, Lee said. Many thought we had nothing to contribute, but we brought with us something more valuable than size or strength. We brought millennia of experience in turning apparent weaknesses into strengths. The displays shifted to show the new training facilities being built across Coalition space. Special operations centers designed to teach human tactics to other species warriors. The future of warfare was changing, and humanity was leading that change. Our size forced us to think differently, to find ways to overcome larger opponents, Lee explained. On Earth, we learned that the smallest predator could bring down the largest prey through intelligence and adaptation. The Drachnid learned this lesson too late. He brought up footage from the final days of the war. Drachnid strongholds falling one by one, not to massive fleet actions, but to small teams striking at critical weaknesses. The mighty empire had crumbled from within, defeated by an enemy they could barely see. This victory belongs to every species in the Coalition, Lee declared. We all had to learn new ways of thinking, new approaches to warfare. The future belongs not to the largest or the strongest, but to those willing to adapt, to innovate, to see opportunity where others see weakness. The assembly hall erupted in applause, the sound thunderous in the vast space. Lee stood quietly, remembering the dismissive looks and patronizing comments from just months ago. How quickly things had changed. As Supreme Commander of Coalition Special Operations, he continued when the applause died down. I pledge to continue this revolution in military thinking. Size, strength, and overwhelming force will always have their place, but they are no longer the only path to victory. The new training programs were already showing results. Species that had once relied solely on their massive size were learning the value of precision and stealth. The phrase, think like a human, had become a compliment in military circles. The galaxy is changing, Lee concluded. The Drachnid taught us that bigger isn't always better. Humanity taught everyone that smaller doesn't mean weaker. Together, we're building a coalition that values all contributions, all perspectives, all approaches to solving problems. As he stepped down from the podium, Lee caught sight of his reflection in the polished surface. He smiled, remembering the first time he'd stood in this hall, feeling impossibly small among the giant alien species. Now he stood tall, proud not of humanity's size or strength, but of their ability to turn adversity into advantage. The victory celebration continued around him, but Lee's mind was already on the future. The war was over, but the revolution in military thinking was just beginning. Humanity's greatest contribution to the coalition wasn't their fighting strength or their tactical brilliance. It was teaching the galaxy that true power came in all sizes. The stars shone brightly through the assembly hall's dome, witnesses to a new era in galactic history, an era where being human-sized meant being elite, where the smallest blade could make the deepest cut, and where victory belonged not to the largest army, but to the most adaptable one.